Welcome to Science Views from the Valley. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Kassan. Science Views from the Valley is a monthly program that will explore interesting science topics and how they relate to the San Luis Valley and the Upper Rio Grande region. Hello and good morning on this lovely spring day. 2 weeks ago, on April 15th, the great polymath Leonardo da Vinci was born. Polymaths are people who are able to apply a number of different topics to solve problems. Leonardo da Vinci certainly embodied that definition. He explored not only art, but also engineering, anatomy, cartography, paleontology, and astronomy. Though he is often known as the painter of the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, his scientific achievements were no less impressive. Today, I would like to talk about a few of the different scientific accomplishments of Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci was born illegitimately in 1452 to a legal notary from Florence, Italy, and a lower-class woman in Vinci, a small town near Florence. The Renaissance period was already underway in Italy, fueled by the cultural changes that occurred as the result of the Black Plague, which killed over 1/3 of the world's population at that time. Italy was particularly hard hit by the Black Plague. Over 50% of the population was killed by the disease. This close proximity to death caused people to shift their focus on their earthly lives rather than on spirituality and the afterlife. The rise of humanism, the study of poetry, grammar, history, moral philosophy, and rhetoric also played a role in the development of the Renaissance. Da Vinci received very little formal education in writing, reading, and mathematics. His father was impressed with his son's artistic talent and had arranged for Da Vinci to be apprenticed at age 14 or 15 in the workshop of artist Andrea del Verrocchio, who himself was the apprentice of the famous sculptor Donatello. By the time Da Vinci was 18, he was collaborating on some of Verrocchio's paintings. The first is believed to be Tobias and the Angel. Modern art historians believe that Leonardo painted the fish and the little dog in the painting. Another of Verrocchio's paintings, the Baptism of Christ, was partially painted by Da Vinci. Da Vinci would spend the next 11 years refining his artistic skills until he became an independent master in 1478. Da Vinci, however, believed that art was connected to science and nature. Despite lacking much formal education, he filled dozens of secret notebooks with inventions and theories crossing a broad range of science fields, including engineering, astronomy, and the natural sciences. His designs included the bicycle, helicopter, submarine, and military tank. He also advanced the fields of anatomy and physiology, optics, and hydrodynamics. But most of his designs were not built by his contemporaries because they were either too expensive, too impractical, or the technology of the time period was not sufficient. Some of these designs would not be invented until centuries later. His famous notebooks consisted of 10 codexes, large volumes containing many of his scientific drawings and inventions, and the Paris manuscripts. His varied interests in the arts and the sciences fit the humanist approach to intellectual pursuits that dominated the Renaissance period. Leonardo da Vinci was particularly interested in flight. His interest in flight probably inspired him to improve the anemometer, a device used to measure the speed of wind. Da Vinci wanted to improve the design so people would have a better idea of the wind direction before attempting flight. The anemometer had originally been invented by Leon Battista in 1450, but Da Vinci improved the design while he was in his early 30s, around 1483. His improved design consisted of an arch frame with a rectangular piece of wood hanging in the center by a hinge. A scale was etched on the device frame. When the wind blew through the center of the device, it raised the wooden piece, allowing the observer to measure the force of the wind. Next to his sketches of his improved anemometer, Da Vinci wrote, "For measuring distance transverse per hour with the force of the wind. Here a clock for showing time is required." Da Vinci's flying machine is perhaps the most famous of his many scientific designs. He had spent many hours observing a variety of animals in flight. His notes mention bats, kites, which is a type of bird of prey, and other birds. Da Vinci would write a codex called The Flight of Birds, a large codex consisting of 18 folios that examine the bird flight behavior and Da Vinci's early ideas on the mechanisms for machine flight. This codex was the first time that Da Vinci noted that the center of gravity of a flying bird does not correspond with its center of pressure. Folio 6 of this codex described bird flight and the bird bone structure in great detail, describing how birds would ascend or descend depending on whether there was a headwind, a left wind, or a tailwind. He would remark in this folio that the ribs of the birds were the most useful for flight. Folios 7 and 8 contain detailed drawings of bird wings and how it related to possible machine flight, including its response to gravity and wind. From these many observations and his theories, Leonardo designed his great flying machine. The flying machine design had a wingspan of 33 feet, with a frame made of pine covered in raw silk to create a light but robust membrane. He mentioned in his codex that metal should not be used because of its tendency to break under stress. The flying machine was designed to have a human pilot lie face down in the center of the device. The pilot would then pedal a crank connected to a rod and pulley system which would cause the wings of the device to flap. The wings were designed to twist as they flap, just as bird wings twist as they flap. This wing twist allows the bird and this device to have the correct angle of attack along its wingspan. The outer part of the wing flaps more steeply than the inner part, so the wing twists allow for each part of the wing to have the right angle of attack. Though the device was inspired by nature, the flying machine had one fatal flaw. A human could never create enough power to get the device off the ground. Da Vinci also designed the aerial screw, a device that was an early precursor to the modern-day helicopter. His design involved compressing air to obtain flight, much like the modern helicopter. Da Vinci was very impressed with the screw shape and would use this shape in other inventions. The device, as envisioned by Da Vinci, was 15 feet in diameter and made from reed, linen, and wire. 4 men would stand on the base and work a pumping action to spin the rotary blade in order to lift the device off the ground. Da Vinci mentioned in his sketches of the design that If this instrument made with a screw be well made, that is to say, made of linen of which the pores are stopped up with starch and churned swiftly, the said screw will make it spiral in the air and rise high. Modern scientists believe that due to the weight constrictions, Da Vinci's design would not have taken flight. Da Vinci's notes, however, indicated that he had attempted smaller models of the design, but the first working helicopter would not be built until centuries later, in 1940. Da Vinci's notebooks also contained the first design of the parachute. He wrote, "If a man have a tent made of linen, of which the apertures have all been stopped up, and it be 12 braccia across and 12 in depth, he will be able to throw himself down from any great height without suffering injury." I should note that 12 braccia is approximately 23 feet. Da Vinci's design of the parachute canopy was triangular rather than circular, a design that made modern scientists question whether Da Vinci's parachute would have had enough air resistance to float. Da Vinci's design also used a wooden frame, so weight was another issue. But in 2000, the daredevil Adrian Nichols made a prototype based on Da Vinci's design and tested it. Despite aviation experts' skepticism, Da Vinci's design worked as intended, and Nichols noted that it was a smoother ride than the modern parachute. Da Vinci also had a great interest in war machines. His interest was not due to a violent nature. In fact, Leonardo was a pacifist. But Italy was often at war during the Renaissance. This was, in part, due to Italy being made up of independent city-states ruled by various family houses. The House of Medici ruled in Florence, where Leonardo spent a total of nearly 20 years. Milan, another area where Leonardo would spend over 20 years, was ruled by the House of Sforza. These city-states and the others had continual warfare between them during the Italian Renaissance. The Duke of Milan, who was one of Da Vinci's patrons, was also involved in the Italian wars between France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. He supported France and the Holy Roman Empire. These conflicts provided a highly lucrative market for innovative war machines. Da Vinci studied historical records of military weaponry and listed 9 categories of potential war machines to the Duke of Milan in 1483. These war machines included the portable bridge, improved cannons and catapults, and tanks. He also suggested machines that could remove water from moats, methods of destroying fortresses, and better armor for ships. Da Vinci's design of an armored vehicle involved a large, almost conical wooden structure. The vehicle was capable of moving in any direction and was equipped with weapons that could fire in a 360-degree range. The machine was operated by 8 men, who would constantly turn cranks to spin the machine's wheels. Leonardo, in his notes, would write that he had considered horses for powering the device, but was concerned that the animals would be too unpredictable in the confines of the machine. The machine, however, did have one major flaw. The cranks that powered the machine went in opposite directions. This design would make it impossible for the structure to move forward. Historians and scholars today debate how Da Vinci, whose attention to detail was exemplary and was well aware of the crucial need for mobility during battle, would have made such a simple but devastating flaw. Some suspect that he had designed the flaw deliberately, being a pacifist at heart, in hopes that the war machine would never be built. Da Vinci was fascinated by the idea of rapid-fire weaponry in a time when most firearms had a slow fire rate and were very inaccurate in hitting their targets. This fascination led to him developing a device that is a precursor to the modern machine gun. His design fired 11 to 14 crossbow bolts from a fan-shaped device, allowing for the projectiles to be shot in multiple directions at once. The device was designed to be loaded and fired quickly. It had several racks that allowed the top row to be fired while the second rack was being loaded and the third rack was cooling off after it had fired. He made a similar design for a catapult, allowing stones to be hurled continuously. He also designed a huge crossbow which measured approximately 86 feet long. This device, however, was meant to be more intimidating rather than deadly. Another invention for the military was the air tank, designed so soldiers could do sneak attacks on enemy ships from underwater. Though diving suits were invented earlier in the 15th century, Leonardo made the first mention of using a type of air tank, a bag-like mass that went over the diver's head. Attached to the mass was 2 cane tubes that led to a diving bell floating on the surface. The tubes were open to allow air to the diver below. The mass was also equipped with a valve-operated balloon that could be inflated or deflated so the diver could control his vertical movements while underwater. Always with an eye to detail, Leonardo also designed a pouch for the diver to urinate in. Leonardo is considered by some historians to have invented the first robot. Da Vinci had used pulleys, weights, and gears to create a knight that was capable of independent motion, sitting down, standing up, moving its head, and lifting its visor. This robotic knight was designed for the 1495 pageant in Milan, which Leonardo had been put in charge of by his patron, the Duke of Milan. It is unknown whether the robotic knight was actually built by Da Vinci, but after Leonardo's sketchbook was discovered, the robot was faithfully built using his designs and was found to be fully functional. But Da Vinci's scientific achievements were not only in engineering. Leonardo da Vinci also correctly stated the laws of sliding friction in 1493. He had been studying perpetual motion, the idea that a frictionless machine could be built that would do work indefinitely without an external energy source. Da Vinci correctly concluded that such a machine was not possible. Though he described the laws of sliding friction in his notebooks were never published, and the laws of friction would not be rediscovered until 1699 by French physicist Guillaume Amontons. Leonardo also studied astronomy, making observations of the sun and other celestial bodies. He would write in his notebooks on astronomy, "The Earth is not in the center of the sun's orbit, nor at the center of the universe, but in the center of its companion elements and united with them." He also wrote, "The sun does not move," an indication that Da Vinci supported heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth orbits the sun. This support of heliocentrism was unusual for his time. Most of Da Vinci's contemporaries would support geocentrism, the idea that the sun orbits the Earth. heliocentrism would not be presented mathematically until 1532, when Polish astronomer and mathematician Nicholas Copernicus would complete his manuscript on the theory. Leonardo's scientific achievements also included the natural sciences. He started to study anatomy while he was an apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop. He became a master of topographical anatomy, drawing muscles, tendons, and other anatomical features in great detail. Leonardo had been given permission to dissect human corpses at hospitals in Florence, Milan, and Rome. He would write in the late 1400s, "To obtain a true and perfect knowledge, I have dissected more than 10 human bodies, destroying all the other members and removing the very minutest particles of the flesh by which these veins are surrounded. And as one single body would not last so long, since it was necessary to proceed with several bodies by degrees, until I came to an end and had a complete knowledge. This I repeated twice to learn the differences." His dissections allowed him to observe and document a vast variety of anatomical features and the effects of age and disease on the human body. He was particularly fascinated with the mechanical functions of the human body, studying the human skeleton and how muscular forces were applied to it, a precursor to the modern field of biomechanics. He also observed and drew the effects of age and human emotion on a person's physiology, particularly the emotion of rage. Da Vinci also created a number of drawings on the human facial deformities and the effects of human illnesses on physiology. He was the first to describe and define the diseases of arteriosclerosis, which is the thickening or hardening of the arteries, and liver cirrhosis. He made wax models of the cerebral ventricles and created a glass aorta. Using his glass model, Da Vinci was able to observe the circulation of blood using water and grass seed to watch the flow patterns within the model. Da Vinci would go on to make over 240 detailed drawings, including the first scientific drawing of a human fetus in utero. He started a treatise on human anatomy, which was observed by the Cardinal Louis d'Argon's secretary during a visit in 1517. But Leonardo never completed this document. His interest in anatomy was not limited to humans. He also studied and drew the anatomy of many animals based on his dissections of cows, birds, monkeys, bears, and frogs. He compared their anatomical structure and physiology with that of humans, the science known today as comparative anatomy and physiology. His dissections and observations of comparative anatomy led to him theorizing that humans were closely related to apes and monkeys, something that modern biologists accept today. He also made considerable studies of horse anatomy, drawing a number of diagrams of horses in various stages of movement. These studies would enable him to better design an equestrian monument that he was commissioned to create by the Duke of Milan in honor of his patron's father, Francesco Sforza. Da Vinci's study of anatomy would be examined by other anatomists and artists who developed further anatomical drawings from his work. Da Vinci also studied botany and geology, though more from an artist's view than a scientist. His attention to detail of the natural features were translated to his paintings. The mountains in his Annunciation paintings clearly show vertical strata, while the grass in the paintings are dotted with blossoming plants. The plants in his two paintings, called The Virgin of the Rocks, were painted with such meticulous realism that botanists can readily identify them. In his treatise on painting, Leonardo would write, "All the branches of a tree, at every stage of its height, when put together, are equal in thickness to the trunk below them." Thus, Leonardo demonstrated the importance of understanding both nature and art. Da Vinci is probably the best example of how interdisciplinary humanities and science are. His studies of art and science enabled him to excel in all fields. It is unfortunate today that students are often specialized in their training when they could be more open to innovation and breakthroughs by understanding concepts gleaned from observations and study of other non-related fields. In astronomical news in the San Luis Valley, the Eta Aquarids meteor shower peaks on May 6th and 7th. This meteor shower is an average shower reaching 30 meteors per hour. The meteors will appear to radiate from the constellation Aquarius, which is very low in the southern sky, near the large square of stars that represent the constellation Pegasus. This could make viewing difficult for those of us in the northern hemisphere, but thankfully the moon will be a waxing crescent, allowing for dark skies for better meteor viewing. An interesting fact about the Eta Aquarids meteor shower: they contain dust and debris from Comet Halley, but they are debris that was separated from the comet hundreds of years ago when the comet's orbit came closer to the Earth. The current orbit of Halley's comet is too far from the Earth to be a source of debris for future meteor showers. Comet Halley is arguably the most famous comet. Ancient Greek astronomers recorded the passing of Halley's comet since 467 years BC. These astronomers were unaware that these comets were actually the same comet returning to the skies every 75 to 76 years. English astronomer Edmund Halley was the first to calculate the periodicity of comets in 1705. He believed that the comets sighted in 1456, 1531, 1607, and 1682 were actually the same comet. He predicted it would return in 1758. When the comet did return in 1758, 16 years after Halley's death, the comet was named after him. Due to the comet's sightings being associated with catastrophes, Halley's comet and other comets became known as bad omens. Halley's comet was last seen in 1986. The comet is predicted to return in 39 years and will be a much brighter object than it was in 1986. The only other astronomical event will be the total lunar eclipse that will occur on May 16th. I hope you enjoyed my talk on Leonardo da Vinci's scientific achievements. My next show will be on May 26th. I will be talking about freshwater ecology, both lakes and rivers. If you would like to hear a particular topic, contact me at spiderwomankrza@gmail.com. If you would like to hear one of my previous shows, they are archived on YouTube on the channel Science Views from the Valley, Alamosa, CO. I would like to thank the KRZA staff for their help in broadcasting this show, and to all of my Science Views from the Valley listeners. Have a good day.